G'day. Today we're going to be talking about resilience. What is it? We're going to talk about a misconception that I had regarding resilience, and we're going to look at the different ways that we can see resilience through the lens of mental illness. All that and more coming up on Today Shattered the Podcast. G'day. Resilience. What does it mean to you? What does it mean to be resilient? How can you show resilience? And how can resilience, the word, be a bad thing when it comes to mental illness? I was hurt 15 years ago. I mean, hurt is the way I put it. I was attacked by a man with a knife. I ended up with CPTSD, which is PTSD on drugs. It's like extra PTSD. It's complex PTSD. And the more that you look into that, the more that you will get different variations of meaning as to what it actually means. But it basically comes down to PTSD is pretty much from a one-off experience. Trauma, tragedy, accident, incident, something like that. CPTSD, complex PTSD, is PTSD that comes after a number of incidents or a series of traumas that accumulate and become this thing that is much bigger than PTSD. So let's talk resilience, because that's what we're here to chat about today. So, resilience. I used to think that to be resilient meant that you didn't get knocked over. So if something happened, if something bad happened in your world, that to be resilient meant that you were able to stand and take it. Imagine you're standing in the ocean. The waves are coming in. As an Australian, this is something that I know really, really well. Uh, you can watch people as the waves come in. Will they try and stand and take a wave? As in, will they try and keep their feet on the ground and let a wave crash over them and perhaps tip them over, perhaps, give them a drenching? Or do they dive over the wave and slide down the back of it? Well, it depends on the situation for me, I think. When the waves are small, sure, you can stand up, you can take it. Now, what has this got to do with resilience? The metaphor is that for me, I assumed that no matter what wave came, no matter what wave was in front of me, to be resilient, I needed to stand there and be able to take it. You know what I mean? I would be unaffected. I once described my mental health or my mental health person as being, I thought I was Superman. Not that I was able to leap tall buildings. I wasn't incredible. I wasn't anything like that. But I used to think that no matter what trauma came, I could hack it. I could take it. And that came from working with people with disabilities. I did that for 18 years, working as a behaviour modification specialist, which is a person that comes in and teaches staff how to work with clients that have negative behaviours. It's a dangerous job. It's a hard job. And it's a job that's filled with trauma. For instance, there was a little girl with autism that we went in to assess. And that was the first step in any process of intervention of working with people with disabilities with negative behaviors, was just to assess, to figure out exactly where they were at. So some of the things that we looked at were how long they slept, did they sleep, their toileting schedule, their morning schedule, their afternoon schedule, whatever, whenever there was the most negative behaviors. Now, for this one young woman, we were brought into the family home and we were like a fly on the wall. and we would watch this little girl, and we had a chart that we would take notes on any violent behaviors that we saw. Well, on the first day, there was too many to write down. So I brought myself a little clicker, click counter kind of device. We counted 310 separate acts of violence in this morning routine against this little girl's family. Now, it was everything from hitting, kicking, biting, headbutting, it was self abuse, it was, uh, any kind of violent act. And for it to be over 300 times in a morning, that gives you an idea of the trauma that we were dealing with, because we would then step in and try and take the place of the parents, and we would try things. We would attempt to communicate with her in ways that would potentially be more effective, hopefully be more effective, while at the same time taking copious notes, trying to understand how our intervention was impacting on the client's behavior. So, needless to say, in this job, I got hurt a lot. I got hurt a lot. It was to the point I realized years later that there was a significant issue when it came to my working with people with disability and the trauma that I was going through, because I went to the hospital one day and everybody knew who I was. I walked in the door, the security guard, Mark, how's it going? Hey, Dave, what's up? Walked in, the triage nurse. Oh, Mark, what have you got today? The the cleaner came by to clean the chairs. Mark, how's it going? Hey, man, how are you? The wardsman, the ward clerks. Mark, back in again, mate. What's going on? I was known by name by everybody in there, including the doctors. That at that time should have been a indicator that something was happening to me that I should be dealing with regards to my mental health, because we didn't think about it. You would be punched in the face and then you would have to work with that client for the rest of the morning because you were it. This idea that I need to be able to take any punishment that is dealt out to me and be able to just laugh it off. That's what I thought resilience was. It's not, actually, it's only been in the last couple of weeks that I've realized that, yeah, that might be a type of resilience, but it's not the only kind of resilience. The resilience to be knocked over, to fall down, to fail, and then to get back up. Now, there's going to be people that are going to hear this and they're going to go, seriously, Mark, we all figured that that was what resilience was. But to me, it was transformative in the way that I viewed myself. Because if I look at resilience as my ability to get back up, get back on the bike, so to speak, then that kind of resilience is just as valid as the resilience that means that you don't fall over. And when your focus is on not falling over, on not being knocked down, when you put your self-worth into that concept, when you do get knocked over, when you do fall down, it's a twofold tragedy, because the event not only knocks you down, but it impacts on your self-worth, because while being knocked over, while falling down, maybe um, maybe unintentional, maybe it's not your fault. Whenever you see that, whenever you see that incident of falling over. And I'm talking about when you fail, when you do something or something happens to you that's going to affect you emotionally. Obviously, I'm talking about some kind of trauma. And that's where a lot of the self stigma comes from, I think. And self stigma is probably the last great stigma that people will talk about. Because if you get out on the public street and start swearing at, say, a person with mental illness or a foreign person, you're going to get on the news. You're going to get on the internet. You're going to be vilified. You're going to be crucified. Our society will not tolerate that kind of behavior anymore. Thank God. Our Western societies, obviously, that's what I'm talking about. So, in the public eye, to be different, to be differently able to have a mental illness isn't seen as it was in the olden days, in the bad old days. It's why the mental hospitals were filled because people did not understand. And I'm old enough to remember that everybody had a crazy Aunt Bess, somebody in the family that we didn't talk about because they were a little different. That's how we viewed people with mental illness, that they were different, that they were separate, that they were other, that they were less than. So, in this modern climate where everybody's equal and we're all the same and nobody's better than anybody else, why is it that when you suffer a mental illness, you are the one that is the biggest critic? It's called self stigma. Why do we feel this self stigma? Why do we look at other people and go, you know what? They went through something horrific, they went through something tragic, and I can feel compassion. But if I go through something, if I am dealing with an issue or I'm dealing with psychological problems and I can understand it that way, why do I consider that to be weakness? Why do I look down on myself? Why do people with mental illness have so much self doubt and look at themselves as being less than perhaps they were, less than what they could be? Because it's an interesting thing with mental illness because it doesn't just destroy your nows because you don't have a now. Your world is just filled with pain. That's all you can deal with. It doesn't just destroy the future because you can't see that there could possibly be a future. So your present is destroyed, your future is destroyed. But the thing that people don't realize is that your past is destroyed as well because every experience that you've had when you have a serious mental illness is now remembered through that lens of your current pain. So you look back at events in your life where you may have failed, where you may have done the wrong thing, where you may have hurt somebody, and it's magnified and it's intensified. And your mind, which is lying to you, which is basically what mental illness is, makes those things a million times worse than they were. It magnifies them. So it doesn't just destroy your present, your future, but it also destroys your past. It's impossible to think of times where you were truly happy. I look at times in my own life where I know I was happy. I know I was having a good time. But I look back at those times with no emotion. I can't feel that joy that I should. And that's things like when my daughter was born. I wish that I could remember what it felt like to hold her for the first time in a positive way. But my mental illness talks about the experiences that she's had living with me her whole life with a mental illness, the times that I failed. So I look at that memory, that beautiful memory, and it's not beautiful. It's distorted by the lens of my mental illness. So resilience for me now, and I'm constantly applying this to things in my life. Resilience is not being knocked down. So it isn't being able to stand tall in the midst of crisis. There's a famous story from World War One, and this probably defined how I saw resilience for most of my life. And it was talking about the Battle of the Somme in France, and it was the worst day in British military history. 20,000 men killed in an hour. They say that some of these men climbed out of their trenches and they had these massive greatcoats on, these massive overcoats, and they flicked up the collars as if it was raining as the bullets were flying at them, and they just walked across no man's land. They walked towards the enemy, mown down in their tens of thousands, killed and murdered. For some reason, I saw that as being resilient, being able to be in a trial and be able to put your head down and walk through it. And of course, yes, that can be resilience. But for me, the resilience is getting back up. This is where I can't talk about the Somme anymore, because once you were hit in that situation, you were done and dusted. But walking through trauma without being affected by it is impossible. You cannot go through any trauma and expect that it's not going to do something fundamental to you. And it might be something small, but it may be something massive. So, is resilience being able to stand up in that test and walk towards the bullets calmly, as if you're in a rainstorm? Or is it being able to be knocked over and then getting back up? Would resilience in the Somme analogy be the guys that, I don't know, ran from shell hole to shell hole? Were they the resilient ones because they realized the danger and they used whatever cover they could? So when it comes to resilience now, what I love about the paradigm shift that I've had from this idea that resilience is being able to take anything, be a man, take a spoonful of cement and harden up, build a bridge, get over it, to saying, all right, I will get knocked down. I will have situations where I will face trauma, where I will struggle. But perhaps that's not the end of the world. Perhaps having a setback, having a fall is not the end. It's not the crisis that I've made it out to be in my head, that if I am in a situation where I am not doing as well as I should, am I being resilient by just retreating into my distractions, my mindfulness? It's a whole different sort of courage, isn't it? Do I have the courage to say that I am not strong enough to deal with something? Do I have the courage to say that this is beyond me? courage, resilience, hope. These are all words that I have learned at various times in my mental health journey to hate. This idea of hope, the fact that everybody else has hope and I don't, the fact that everybody else sees a purpose and I don't. And then you jump on all the mental illness forums and sites and Instagrams, and they're all talking about being resilient. And they all happen to be beautiful for some reason. And they all happen to have the ability to be in these amazing locations. And they're always jumping up and down for some reason. Don't understand why jumping has got so much to do with resilience. And you look at this and you realize that the lie that's being told is not a lie that is going to hurt society, because it's good to live well. It's good to be happy. But for that next little kid that's going to suffer a trauma and is perhaps going to walk away with a mental illness, that kid that isn't going to be able to stand up to the things that you can stand up to, they're never going to be able to jump while standing on a rock at a beach somewhere. It's such a dangerous lie, because that person needs to know that the end goal is not to be free of mental illness. The end goal is to be able to exist through your mental health issues in the best way that you can. So that's how I'm going to start thinking about resilience now. It's how I'm going to try and apply that prism to my thinking of getting knocked over is not the end of the world. Now, I was injured 15 years ago. Knife attack, ended up with PTSD, years of trauma working with people with disability. And it's been interesting that so much of that time has been spent thinking that I've failed, living in this world of failure. So a couple of weeks ago, I started to have a bad time. We're not 100% sure what happened, but my mentals just got worse and worse and worse and worse. And my mentals were not good at all. I started retreating into old habits. My family were concerned about me. I fell into old behaviors that I hadn't displayed for a while, being very, very quiet, not realizing that it's been a week and I haven't said a word to anybody. Because in my head, I got this cacophony of sound and shouting and dealing with mental illness. And in the midst of that, there was an overwhelming sense of failure, because my mentals were really, really bad after all these years of doing all this work and struggling to be the best that I can be. And yet, for no apparent reason, I feel like I've gone back to square one, and I hadn't. My wife was kind enough to compare my behavior during that week, 2 weeks, to the behaviors I displayed when I was first injured. And she was really cool in that showed me by blow how different my behavior was to what it would have been. So she said, well, you may not have spoken for a day or two, but years ago it would have been weeks, 3-4 weeks, that you wouldn't say a word unless you were asked a direct question. And even if you were asked a direct question, didn't know if you were going to answer. So in my mind, when I realized that I was in this point of really, really bad mental illness symptoms, I hadn't gone back to square one. And because I'd had the patience to ride the wave, to just realize that Yes, I was in the middle of a mental health, not so much a crisis, but a tsunami, a tsunami of emotion crashed over my shore of mental health. The fact that I did get knocked over, the fact that I did retreat into some of my negative behaviors was not a failure. In fact, I was being more resilient than I realized. I was weathering waves that in the past would have taken me out. But now I was able to stand up through some of them. Sure, I got knocked over. But when you look at resilience as the ability to get back up, it changes that paradigm in your head. It changes that thought process in your head. It changes everything about what you're going through when you're realizing that the fact that I'm still here, the fact that I'm able to push the thoughts of suicide away because my reason to stay is bigger than my reason to go. I'm being resilient, going for that walk that I really didn't want to go on, but I knew that I needed to for my mental health well-being, was being resilient. Spending time on TikTok, strangely enough, a mindfulness exercise for me. Just trying to find something funny. Not really laughing because you're in the midst of a mental health trauma, but I knew that I was doing things that I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to be mindful of what's around me. Now, that's not an ooga booga, let's look at butterflies and think about rainbows. It's being aware of where you actually are. So my encouragement today is to be aware that resilience is many, many different things. Resilience is not having the awesome superpower to never struggle. Being resilient can be the fact that you got out of bed in the morning, that you got dressed. Being resilient could be the fact that you greeted the people that you live with in the morning. Resilience is so much more than not falling down. Celebrate your resilience. Try and point it out in the people around you. Try to be aware that somebody may be going through the fight of their life right in front of you, and you would never ever know because they're hiding it so well. Be resilient. Celebrate your resilience. And know that those small victories, those small moments are the best moments. You know, so many people with mental illness are looking for healing. I want to get better. I can beat my disorder. Maybe you can. And if you do, God bless you. I mean, fantastic. If you find out the secret, if you find out the cure, let me know. I want to know. But for the vast majority of us, just being here, being at work, being out of bed, being dressed is a victory. Thank you for listening to Shattered the podcast. I'd like to thank our producer, Meredith Brosnan, our executive producer, Torian Lau, and the band Adelaide for allowing us to use their song as our theme. Go to shatteredthepodcast.com for more information.